From New York City, the epicenter of the pandemic, this is Democracy Now!
My administration continues to press Congress to replenish the enormously successful Paycheck Protection Program, which has impacted 30 million American jobs. We hope to have an agreement very soon.
As the White House and Democrats near a deal on a $450 billion coronavirus relief package, members of the Progressive Caucus say it bails out businesses once again and fails to protect working people. We'll look at who's getting bailed out with the American Prospect's David Dayen. And we'll look at how undocumented people in New York and New Jersey's hardest-hit communities are reporting fears of hunger with record high unemployment and no federal assistance, and how they're organizing and helping each other through mutual aid. Then, as coronavirus infections continue to mount inside immigration jails across the country, we'll go to California's Otay Mesa Detention Center, where dozens launched a hunger strike to call for their release, and authorities pepper sprayed a number of women.
They are throwing pepper spray at us. They do not respect us. We are human, not animals. Help. They want to force us to sign documents so that we throw away the masks. They want to charge us for T-shirts we used to make the masks.
But first, we'll get an update from Democracy Now! Co-host Juan Gonzalez on his mother, his wife, and how he's doing in New Jersey, #2 in the pandemic in the United States. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In the United States, deaths from the coronavirus have topped 42,000. Confirmed cases are approaching 800,000. Worldwide, total confirmed cases are closing in on 2.5 million, with 171,000 recorded deaths. President Trump said Monday he's shutting down all immigration to the United States by executive order. It's his most drastic move yet to cut entry of foreigners into the country. He announced the move on Twitter last night, but did not offer specifics on the legal basis for the decision. More southern states announced plans to start rolling back lockdowns. Georgia's Republican Governor Brian Kemp said Monday gyms, hair and nail salons, spas, tattoo parlors, massage therapists will be able to start operating Friday. Restaurants and movie theaters will reopen Monday. Kemp acknowledged his decision will make more Georgians sick.
When we have more people moving around, we're probably going to see our cases continue to go up. But we're a lot better prepared for that now than we were over a month ago. We have the hospital bed capacity.
Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms said she was not given advance notice of the move and that the number of fatalities is still on the rise. Savannah, Georgia Mayor Van Johnson said he is beyond disturbed, noting testing is still lacking and the state has not seen the recommended 14-day decline before reopening. In South Carolina, Republican Governor Henry McMaster's reopening public beaches, department stores, and some retail businesses starting today. Ohio and Tennessee said they would start to reopen businesses from May 1st. This comes as anti-lockdown protests continue around the country. The government's top advisor on the coronavirus, Dr. Anthony Fauci, warned protests against state lockdowns will backfire and cause a spike in new cases. Meanwhile, Massachusetts warned it's becoming a hotspot for the coronavirus as cases surged in recent days. The death toll is expected to top 2,000 there this week, with 40,000 confirmed cases. The Boston Globe printed 16 pages of death notices on Sunday, more than double the number of pages this time last year. Here in New York, numbers continue to trend downwards. Known COVID-19 deaths dipped below 500 for the first time since April 2nd. The total official death toll remains by far the highest in the country at close to 19,000, with over 250,000 confirmed cases. New York City's canceled all public events through June. The New York State Nurses Association sued the New York Department of Health and 2 hospitals Monday for their failure to provide adequate safety measures at the start of the coronavirus crisis. This is Judy Sheridan-Gonzalez, president of the Nurses Association and an emergency room nurse.
The hospitals were cooperative with the state in doubling their capacity, but they did not double their staffing. And because so many of our nurses got sick, we were terribly understaffed, which really results in negative outcomes and even death of patients. Because if you are only capable of taking care of 1 or 2 critically ill patients and you're ended up being told you have to take care of 5 or 6, you're going to have to neglect 4 of them.
In other news from New York, the Metropolitan Transportation Authority confirmed plans to hire another 350 police officers this year, despite the fact that it's facing $8 billion in losses due to the coronavirus crisis. The MTA is seeking another $4 billion in federal bailout money after receiving $3.8 billion in the first relief bill passed last month. MTA data shows Black and brown people are the most targeted by fare evasion policing. At least 79 MTA workers have died and thousands more tested positive for COVID-19. In California, a federal judge has ordered Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, urgently review the cases of detainees most likely to suffer severe illness or death from the coronavirus to determine whether they can be released. Judge Jesus Bernal condemned the system-wide inaction in responding to the outbreak. The order cites detainees over 55, pregnant immigrants, and those who suffer from chronic health conditions. Around 31,000 immigrants are in immigration prison. At least 220 have confirmed cases of COVID-19. In other immigration news, the Supreme Court said it'll consider the role that undocumented workers are playing to help combat the coronavirus outbreak ahead of a major case challenging Trump's move to end DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Admissions program. About 27,000 DACA recipients are healthcare workers. Legal groups involved in the case say terminating DACA during the public health crisis would be catastrophic. The Treasury Department announced Monday it's providing nearly $3 billion in payroll support for airlines. The Los Angeles Times reported at least 15 airline workers died from the coronavirus over a 9-day period earlier this month. But the true number is likely much higher, and there is no central tracking mechanism for COVID fatalities. Airline workers were previously barred from wearing face masks as the outbreak spread in earlier weeks, and some say they were kept in the dark about colleagues who contracted the virus. Disney will stop paying over 100,000 employees this week, nearly half its workforce. The company is maintaining its executive bonus plan and a planned $1.5 billion dividend. Disney chief executive Bob Chapek said he would take half his $2.5 million base pay due to the crisis, but he makes an estimated $25 million annually thanks to bonuses and a long-term incentive award. Disney chair and former CEO Bob Iger earned $47.5 million as CEO last year and is worth $690 million. Jeremy Hacken, president of Unite Here Local, representing Disney World workers in Florida, told The Hollywood Reporter, quote, "Florida's on the verge of a humanitarian disaster. The system was designed to fail even in the best of times, and now hundreds of thousands of workers are paying the price. What are workers going to do when their children are starving? Ask them to wait 7 weeks for Governor Ron DeSantis to send them a check?" he asked. Smithfield Foods, which recently had to shut down a pork production plant after more than 350 workers tested positive for COVID-19, is blaming immigrant workers for the coronavirus outbreak. A spokesperson said, quote, "Living circumstances in certain cultures enabled the rapid spread of the disease." Employees and investigations into the outbreak, however, show Smithfield made a number of missteps in managing early signs of the outbreak, including concealing infections and compelling workers to work without protection. The South Dakota Smithfield plant that was closed now has well over 700 COVID-positive people and those related to them in the area, a major hotspot in the United States. In Michigan, a 5-year-old girl from Detroit, the daughter of 2 first responders, died of COVID-19. Skylar Herbert is Michigan's youngest known death from the coronavirus. She spent 2 weeks on a ventilator after developing a rare complication that caused her brain to swell. As countries including Germany, Norway, and Australia start to ease coronavirus restrictions, the World Health Organization has cautioned against a hasty lifting of protective measures, warning the worst is yet ahead of us.
We want to re-emphasize that easing restrictions is not the end of epidemic in any country. Ending the epidemic will require a sustained effort on the part of individuals, communities, and governments to continue suppressing and controlling this deadly virus.
In Britain, a government official has said the nationwide lockdown could last for 3 more months as the official death toll tops 16,000. New data suggests the COVID-19 death toll in parts of the UK is up to 40% higher than the hospitals-only figures reported by the government earlier this month. On Monday, France became the 4th country to report over 20,000 deaths. In the Philippines, authoritarian President Rodrigo Duterte has threatened to impose martial law to enforce lockdown and social distancing measures. Duterte previously said police and military should shoot people dead if they flouted lockdown measures. Police say 120,000 people have been arrested or given warnings for violating government-imposed rules. In the Mexican border city of Nuevo Laredo, 14 asylum seekers have tested positive for COVID-19 after coming into contact with a man recently deported from the United States. Meanwhile, 3 migrants deported 2 weeks ago from the U.S. to Haiti have tested positive for COVID-19. CNN is reporting North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is in grave danger after a surgery. South Korean media reported Kim had a heart surgery, but few details about his condition are known. Speculation about Kim's health was fueled when he didn't appear at a recent celebration for his grandfather and state founder, Kim Il-sung. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his former political opponent Benny Gantz signed a deal Monday to form a national emergency government. The deal puts an end to a protracted political stalemate over neither candidate, after neither candidate received enough votes to claim victory after 3 elections over the past year. Gantz previously had said he will not work with Netanyahu. Netanyahu is under criminal indictment in 3 corruption cases. His trial was postponed to next month because of the coronavirus outbreak. In Hong Kong, activists are warning authorities are using the coronavirus pandemic as cover to target critics after police arrested 15 high-profile activists Saturday, including former politician and legislator Lee Cheuk-yan, media tycoon Jimmy Lai, and Democratic Party founder Martin Lee. Hong Kong has arrested over 7,000 people for their involvement in last year's massive anti-government protests, which were triggered by a proposed law which would have allowed authorities to extradite people in Hong Kong to China. The price of oil dropped below zero for the first time ever Monday. The historic collapse is due in part to a massive drop in demand because of the coronavirus pandemic. The news came on the 10th anniversary of the Deepwater Horizon disaster, which led to the largest offshore oil spill in history, releasing over 200 million gallons of oil into the ocean, killing 11 people and tens of thousands of wildlife. And as we celebrate the 50th anniversary of Earth Day tomorrow, a group of New York City Council members announced a resolution Monday calling for the city to divest from financial institutions who back the fossil fuel industry. The move comes after sustained campaigning by climate justice groups and is supported by the Stop the Money Pipeline campaign. J.P. Morgan Chase, BlackRock, and Liberty Mutual are some of the companies targeted by the resolution. Earlier this month, Reuters reported J.P. Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and Citigroup are preparing to seize oil and gas assets as energy producers reel from the oil industry crash. This is 350.org co-founder Bill McKibben speaking during a virtual news conference yesterday.
Unlike political change in Washington, change on Wall Street could come, A, very fast, because when banks and things make announcements, they move stock markets within minutes, and B, could come globally. Washington, for better and better mostly, doesn't really rule the world anymore, but Wall Street still kind of does. And so the things that happen in New York with money are of absolute first-order importance in this fight, especially given how little time we have.
And that is Bill McKibben. Those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York with my co-host Juan Gonzalez, joining from his home in New Jersey, second only to New York with infections and death from COVID-19, with at least 88,000 cases and nearly 4,500 deaths. Juan, welcome.
Thank you, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.
So, Juan, before we continue with the show, we spoke on air last Tuesday. Your mother had just gone into the hospital, 92 years old, in New Jersey, and she tested positive for COVID-19. Can you give us an update on your mom and also your wife, Lilia Fernandez?
Yes, Amy. Well, thanks for asking. Yes, my mother was in the hospital for several days, but thankfully she was released late last week and was sent to a rehabilitation center where she's getting some therapy now to get her strength back. But it seems that she's out of danger. Likewise with my wife, Lilia, we had a rough time last week. She was in really bad shape for several days, but now seems to be in the clear. She's eating well. She's has no fever. She's still in isolation, and she's going to be in isolation in our house for at least another week to 10 days, but at least the worst appears to be over for our family. And luckily, I haven't shown any symptoms until now, so please keep your fingers crossed. And I want to thank all of the fans of Democracy Now! Who tweeted or emailed to us their hopes for the recovery of my family members.
Very quickly, Juan, I think the things that have happened with your family are so instructive. When you called the ambulance for Lilia, the EMT heroes are not talked about enough, but who came in, and those kind of recommendations, like proning, like laying on your stomach to open up your lungs.
Well, we did have to call on Thursday the ambulance because she was really not only incredibly weak. She didn't have a fever, but she was having a lot of trouble breathing, and she was also delirious. She couldn't recall where she was, what was happening, what had happened the day before, and so I really got quite frightened. I called 911. The ambulance came, and these EMTs were fantastic. I mean, they've been dealing with this day in and day out. They took all her vital signs, and they said no, she was getting enough oxygen. And the head EMT said, "Look, I know this all sucks. You're feeling worse than you've ever felt in your life. But I'm telling you, if I take you to the hospital right now, I'm ready to do it. But if I take you to the hospital, they're likely just to have you there for several hours and send you back home because there's so many other people that are even more sick." So he did give us a bunch of instructions about ways to get through it as best as possible. And then he said, look, anytime she gets worse, if it's 5 minutes from now, half an hour from now, or tomorrow, just call us and we'll take her to the hospital right away. And so I think that they calmed her quite a bit. They calmed me quite a bit. And then within a couple of days, she was doing much better.
And then again with your mother, I mean, this whole issue of testing in this country and the severe lack of access to testing, and yet Trump's push to open the country, to, quote, liberate the states. Your 92-year-old mother, who had been taking care of you, learned COVID-positive cousin, and was expressing all the symptoms. You take her even to the emergency room of one of the best hospitals in New Jersey, and they wouldn't test her.
Right. They said that she initially they said she likely had COVID, but they were not going to admit her or even to test her until I kept pressing them on the issues of the enormous, the unbearable pain that she had in her abdomen. At that point, they took another look and they said, yes, we're going to admit her, but we have to test her first. And when they tested her and she turned out COVID positive, then they realized that they'd initially made a mistake in just trying to send her home. So yes, you're not getting admitted, you're not getting tested, even at the hospitals, even at the best hospitals, unless they are planning to admit you. So it is the testing issue is still a huge issue, as many of in the commercial or corporate media have said, and the alternative media, that the testing issue remains primary for dealing with what's going to happen after the country begins to reopen.
And the fact that they offered your mother hydroxychloroquine when the studies have not been done yet, when some of the studies that are being done, like one in Brazil, were stopped because of the number of cardiac arrests and deaths in those studies, and yet you were being offered hydroxychloroquine when lupus patients who need it can't get it.
I wasn't being offered it. They were planning to begin to give my mother treatment for it when I asked about it. And when the doctor said, yes, well, we're giving hydroxychloroquine to all the patients here. And I said, is this part of a test, a research test? And he said, yes, we are conducting research tests, but your mother, being over 90, would not qualify for that test, but we're routinely giving it. And I said, do you have to give it? And he said, well, no, we don't really have to. If you don't want to, I'm perfectly fine with not giving it to her. So I said, well, no, thank you. You don't give it to her. If she doesn't have a severe case and her life is not threatened right now, I'd rather not take the chance. And so the doctor pretty much left it up to me only when I asked about it, not because otherwise he was just going to administer it to her anyway.
And finally, Juan, in the midst of all of this, you, as well as your wife, Lilia, have been working on raising money, doing mutual aid for immigrants in New Jersey. Talk about that work and the organizations that are desperately now trying to get support to people who will not get money from the stimulus package, who've been hardworking people all of their lives, but are losing their jobs now, one by one.
Yeah, well, we managed to actually a week ago last Sunday, just before my mother went into the hospital and before Lilia got sick, we started together with a bunch of grassroots organizations here in New Brunswick. Of course, this is a city of 55,000 people, the majority of whom are Latino, and most of them from Mexico, from the Oaxaca state of Mexico. So there's a large immigrant and large undocumented population here in New Brunswick. They don't qualify for the stimulus. So we started a mutual aid of New Brunswick GoFundMe page with various groups in the coalition to defend Lincoln Annex. In less than a week, we managed to raise $17,000 in donations for direct cash grants to these hard-hit families, and we've already managed to put 5,000 of that out right away, even before the GoFundMe money has come in, because it takes a while for the stuff to be processed. But other people fronted the money to be able to start the grants out the door to get to these families, and so we have been able to already get at least 5,000 out the door, and we'll be getting more out in the rest of this week. Amy, I wanted to talk about something else, which I think is very important. We're seeing a lot of it now, which is these protests around the country of people demanding an end to the shutdowns that were aimed to stop the spread of the pandemic. And what troubles me most about this is how right-wing extremists are brandishing automatic weapons, and they become regular features of these protests. With the man in the White House saying nothing to condemn this form of intimidation. Obviously, most of them are Trump supporters. And I'd like our viewers and listeners to ask themselves a question. If hundreds of African Americans or Latinos showed up in cities around the country brandishing automatic weapons, what would be the response of the country to this? Why is this being almost accepted and normalized now as a method of protest? And my fear is that this will become normalized over the next few months as we head toward a bitter national election. And we should make no mistake that this country is edging closer and closer to neo-fascist authoritarianism.
And Juan, you say the issue of it being almost accepted. It's not almost. The president from the bully pulpit of the White House is encouraging it, right? Saying these are his people, and he's saying liberate these states with these protests.
He's encouraging the protests. He hasn't directly, to my knowledge, encouraged the brandishing of weapons, but he's accepting it and praising these folks as wonderful Americans. And I don't think we should discount the possibility that if this president will declare an election that he loses as a fraud and illegitimate and attempt to stay in power. Some people may say this is far-fetched. I hope it is. But I think that we shouldn't delude ourselves that we are living in extraordinary times in the United States right now.
Well, Juan, I am so thankful that you're okay, and all the best to your wife, Lilia Fernandez, extremely important professor at Rutgers University, very popular, so beloved by her students, and your mom. All the best, as well as the communities not only in New Jersey and New York, but all over this country. We are going to continue to look at this issue of mutual aid. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez as we look at how the coronavirus pandemic is impacting undocumented people here in New York City, where the coronavirus has hit immigrant communities the hardest, even as the numbers of daily deaths statewide has declined in recent days. In Queens, often hailed as the most diverse borough in the world, the neighborhoods of Corona, Elmhurst, East Elmhurst, Jackson Heights have been overrun with COVID-19 cases, and even those who aren't sick are reporting fears of hunger with record high unemployment, no federal assistance for undocumented immigrants. Many are considered essential workers, continue to go to work every day without protective equipment or health insurance. Last week, hundreds of people lined up outside a church in Corona for a free bag of groceries and supplies. The line stretched 22 blocks, if it wasn't well over 1,000. This is Rosie Sotelo speaking to Univision.
We can't afford rent. We can't afford food. That's why we're hoping we'll get more help for everyone. That's why we're here.
Last week, California Governor Gavin Newsom announced a $125 million relief fund for undocumented immigrants in the state left jobless by the pandemic. That's California. But when asked last Thursday about similar support in New York, Governor Andrew Cuomo refused to commit.
When you are broke, it would be irresponsible to do these things. I do hope and believe the federal government should have a more inclusive policy. But let's do
undocumented immigrants that there's no shot.
Well, we're looking at it, but we have real financial problems right now.
Governor Cuomo is meeting with President Trump at the White House today. This comes as New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio has announced a $20 million initiative sponsored by George Soros' Open Society Foundation to send one-time payments of up to 20,000 undocumented immigrants throughout the city. Individuals will receive $400, families will receive $1,000. As reports of widespread poverty and hunger continue in the immigrant communities, people are also organizing and helping each other through mutual aid, despite extraordinarily difficult circumstances in the epicenter of the epicenter. For more, we're joined by two guests. Juan Carlos Ruiz is a Lutheran pastor at Good Shepherd Church in Brooklyn, co-founder of the National New Sanctuary Movement and the New Sanctuary Coalition here in New York City. And Cynthia Santos Briones is a Mexican photographer, anthropologist, community organizer based here in New York City. Her recent piece in The Nation is headlined, "Immigrants Are Bearing the Brunt of the Coronavirus Crisis," and it's part of a weekly series called The Invisible Front Line by The Nation and the Magnum Foundation. Juan Carlos and Cynthia, thank you so much for joining us. You both are married, so thank you for joining us together on one Skype as you join us from your home in Brooklyn. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Juan Carlos, why don't you start off by talking about the scope of the problem, what people are not seeing. You know, the lines of people just in Queens alone far outnumber the protesters in different states calling for reopening the states. But you don't see these images, Juan Carlos. Describe them to us.
So basically, you know, it's the despair that we see on the ground. This is a battleground. The bodies are piling up. As you know, the official number of bodies here in the city that died, the people that died at home, wasn't even part of the official count. We have families with living with infected people. We have families who haven't worked for over a month. And also you have the other reality that, you know, many of our immigrant families, they have been in the front lines. They have become the essential workers. Still invisible, very much invisible. But they've been going out to work without any protection. You know, from the federal government, there is this confusion, missed messages, disinformation coming down the pipe. Also, there in New York in the last year or so, given that we have, as immigrants, become a target, a national target by the federal government, we have become rather visible, but as a way of scapegoating us, as a way of practically, persecuting us under the Homeland Security. We have become the threat, or the public threat for national security. So on the ground, the picture is bleak. Our families are calling, not only the dead ones who are piling up in their homes, but they are hungry and they don't know where to turn, they don't know where to go. Our rapid response solidarity networks in the city, all the way from Washington Heights, in Westchester, here in Sunset Park and Bay Ridge, we've been responding, those rapid responses teams that have been doing a lot of the monitoring of, the NYPD, how the NYPD locally has been in cahoots working with ICE, despite the denial of de Blasio and Cuomo. They keep, they keep working. They've been complicit with this perfect storm. They keep denying that the local police has been working with ICE, but the last year or so, we have had many families who have been persecuted, raided, with the help of New York police. And this has created the perfect storm, because now the people, even any kind of a governmental institution, even when they need to go to the hospital, they have this deep distrust in these institutions, because we have been deceived over and over. They are doing deceptive practices, by our own local government in terms of being complicit with federal immigration. So the situation is dire. Many of our families at this point not only do not have the means for to pay the rent, but they don't have the food that is necessary for their survival.
Yeah, I wanted to bring in Cynthia Santos Briones. Cynthia, could you talk about the mutual aid? I mentioned some of the mutual aid we were doing here in New Brunswick in the Mexican community, immigrant community here. But could you talk about what's going on in New York City with immigrant communities? And also, there's probably a bunch more of a tradition of mutual aid at the community level in many Latin American communities, because people come from countries where government support or the safety net is not as great.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing this out. I think that I see a sea of solidarity, not only through the religious groups and organization, pro-immigrant organization, also through a restaurant, for example, in the Bronx, La Morada is feeding not just immigrants, also homeless. I was speaking with one of the owners, and they were telling me like they are providing per day 500 or 400 meals. And also, a lot of restaurants are in solidarity also. And people from the community, the mutual aid, it's not only from organization, it's from people, from their own immigrant communities. We have in Mexico and different Latin American communities, in indigenous community and rural communities, these forms of traditional mutual aid, community mutual aid that is right now in the transnational territory, and that kind of form of mutual aid is here. And for example, Mirna Lascano, that is an activist from Mexico, her home, her small apartment become the epicenter of health in Harlem. And she has provided not only food to her community, also she has receiving calls and accompanied people who have their family sick in their own homes. So this mutual aid is coming also from the community for civilians. And this is important to say, no? Of course, the organization of our leaders, faith leaders, are helping a lot the community, but also migrant communities are helping their neighbors, their families, their compadres and their comadres in this crisis.
Cynthia, if you could talk about the media coverage of undocumented communities, what's being missed, and the importance of the personal testimonies that you've been capturing in photos and you've been talking to people.
Yeah, of course. After the government declared quarantine, I reached out through WhatsApp to some close friends from the migrant and Guatemalan communities to check in how were they doing during this pandemic. And as we were continuing to chatting, they were sending me photos and videos about their new life in this pandemic. And I want to say something that some of my friends have been telling me. They have been in front of this pandemic, but they have been always in front of any kind of disaster or pandemic. This is not the first time that the body of the migrant has been facing a crisis. They are always there for us, feeding us, working at our homes as a babysitter, as a nannies. So I was reaching out through Magnum Foundation and the National Magazine, Nation Magazine. So we were talking about to do a piece, and I proposed to show the photos and the videos that these people that is in the front line are making as the role as citizen journalists. They are documenting through their own perspective that we usually don't see in the media. And at some point, descolonize, the perspective of journalists and show the migrant vision, how they are feeling and seeing and living this crisis. And we see through these photos how are the conditions in their homes, small apartments and a family living, one family of 5 members living in a 1-room bedroom apartment. We are looking, people making tortillas. Also, one of the photos that wasn't published in this piece, but one of my friends sent me, Victoria, when she was in a protest outside of Bergen County Jail, and her husband was there. So I think that it's a lot of value when we see the importance and how migrants are documenting this crisis.
And I wanted to ask Juan Carlos Ruiz about the hospital situation, and especially with the undocumented. Clearly, in the anti-immigrant atmosphere we've had in the country for years against undocumented specifically, many migrants may be afraid to go to the hospitals. But and now we hear just last night President Trump saying that he's going to try to shut down all immigration into the country, even legal immigration for the future. This constant use of scapegoating of immigrants in the country under this administration.
And as you know, Juan, I mean, we are fleeing these institutions from our home countries, corrupt institutions that do not have the welfare of our communities. So we are not new to that. But when we come to this land of the free, we expect something else, but it plays out differently when you have, from the high echelons of power, when you have these kinds of attack against our community. I mean, the rhetoric, the xenophobic rhetoric, the racism that has been fed, that continues to really have practical consequences, negative consequences against not only, socially and culturally, but also economically against our people. This virus has evidence, this whole infrastructure of terror, this misallocation of funds or resources into our communities, into the most vulnerable populations of our society. So basically, the virus has unmasked this machinery of death, that feeds on the blood, as the Scott Stringer said, we have a lot of blood in our hands. And basically, even if we wash our hands day and night, it's still bloody. And the government has really caused this perfect storm by, the bunch of lies, by continuing to attack the most vulnerable and continually to victimize and scapegoat the immigrant and our Black and brown communities.
Father Juan Carlos Ruiz, want to thank you so much for being with us. And again, we cannot emphasize enough for people to understand 200 to 300 people a day, as confirmed by the mayor himself, are dying in their homes. How many of them were afraid to go to the hospital, afraid they could be picked up by ICE? Father Juan Carlos Ruiz, co-founder of the New Sanctuary Movement, thank you for being with us. And Cynthia Santos Briones, Mexican photographer, anthropologist, community organizer based here in New York. We're going to link to your piece in The Nation, headlined "Immigrants Are Bearing the Brunt of the Coronavirus Crisis," and your remarkable photographs. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, who's getting bailed out and who isn't? And then we go to Otay Mesa in California, where women, immigrants, have been pepper sprayed by guards as they deal with COVID-19. Stay with us. Performing Amazing Grace at Bellevue Hospital with accompaniment as the staff held a service for their beloved nurse, Filipino nurse Ernesto de Leon, who died from COVID-19. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Democrats are closing in on deal with the White House for a $450 billion relief package to address the ongoing economic fallout from the coronavirus pandemic. Even as progressives say that it bails out businesses without protecting working people. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin says the bill allocates an additional $350 billion of relief for small business after funds for small business in last month's Emergency Act were quickly depleted. In a concession to Democrats, the new relief package also includes $75 billion for hospitals, $25 billion for testing. At Monday's coronavirus task force meeting, Trump suggested demands for testing and ventilators are part of a political conspiracy against him.
Remember, it was all ventilators. And the reason it was all ventilators, they said there's no way he'll ever be able to catch this one. And not only did we catch it, we are now the king of ventilators all over the world. We can send them anywhere, thousands being made a week. And they're very high quality. And that wasn't playing well. So then they said, testing. Oh, we'll get them on testing. Well, testing is much easier than ventilators.
As Trump attacks testing, members of the Progressive Caucus are attacking the new stimulus bill for failing to include measures like rent cancellation, hazard pay, funding for the Postal Service, and vote by mail, and health care expansions. This is Democratic Congressmember Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez speaking at a virtual news conference Monday.
Incrementalism is not helpful in this moment. It's not helpful for people to say, oh, well, we got something, so we might as well support it. You know, we got a nickel, we got a dime in $1 trillion bill, so a nickel is more than nothing, so we should support it, is unacceptable.
For more, we're joined by the executive editor of the American Prospect, David Dayen. He writes a must-read daily update on the pandemic called Unsanitized. David, welcome to Democracy Now! Tell us what's happening here in this latest bailout package. Who's getting bailed out and who isn't?
So this is they're calling it the interim package in between the last really big one, the CARES Act, and then what they're calling CARES Act 2. So I guess you call it CARES Act 1.5. And mostly this replenishes the small business fund. to give out these forgivable loans. There's also $75 billion for hospitals and $25 billion to surge testing. However, as you mentioned, it does not add all of these important priorities like vote by mail, like hazard pay, like helping the post office survive, that progressives have been calling for some time. And so, you know, there's a question of why do you keep giving Republicans the thing that they want, whether it's a giant corporate bailout or this, you know, continued money into the small business fund, when the Democratic priorities are left on the table.
Well, David Dayen, I wanted to ask you, you wrote recently about the naming of Donna Shalala to head the bailout oversight panel. Nancy Pelosi named her, even though she's clearly conflicted in terms of her own private investments, and even though she has virtually no experience in this kind of oversight. Could you talk about the meaning of this coming from the Democrats to name someone like Donna Shalala in charge of seeing how this money is being spent?
Sure. So Shalala is a Pelosi loyalist. She's on the Rules Committee, and that's a tell that she's someone who backs Pelosi 100%. As you mentioned, you know, Shalala was the Health and Human Services Secretary under President Clinton, but this particular bailout oversight panel is really about looking at Federal Reserve lending programs. You know, if you were on the Financial Services Committee, if you were in the Oversight Committee, that might be an important position where you would have a lot of experience. Shalala really doesn't have this sort of history with financial services that you would expect. Now, I did notice in her last disclosure form that she listed a great number of individual stock holdings in businesses like Boeing and Alaska Airlines and lots of oil companies, lots of banks that might be in line for a bailout. Now, Shalala told the Miami Herald yesterday that she has sold those stocks, said she sold some of them up to over a year ago. However, there was never any disclosure of that, which if true, would violate the Stock Act. Which forces disclosure of any transactions by members of Congress within 45 days. So I'm trying to get to the bottom of that. But I think what it signals is that Pelosi wants someone that is personally loyal to her on this panel and expertise at actually conducting the oversight that's needed to make sure that this money is being spent properly. Is a secondary consideration.
David Dayen, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and other members of the Progressive Caucus say they're not going to support this stimulus package. And if you can overall talk about who has benefited so far when we hear about Ruth's Chris Steakhouse getting $20 million and other companies in the small business part of things, and also the banks, and we only have a minute or two.
Sure. I mean, there were about 80 publicly traded companies that received these small business forgivable loans in the small business program. That includes Ruth's Chris and a number of others. You know, in general, smaller businesses were able to get some support, but, you know, you're talking about banks who were able to get billions of dollars in processing fees under that loan program without having to do a whole heck of a lot. And in general, there's been kind of a disproportionate response that is reflected in the CARES Act. You know, for individuals, for small businesses, it's very hard to get relief. Individuals risk having their individual checks taken and garnished by banks. The unemployment program, it's hard to get unemployment insurance. But if you're a big corporation, the Federal Reserve has $4.5 trillion in reserves ready for you. So where you stand in America and where you stand in this bill depends really on your power and influence.
We want to thank you for being with us. David Dayen will be visiting you again in the coming days, executive editor of the American Prospect, where he writes a daily update on the pandemic called Unsanitized. When we come back, why are women in detention, in immigration detention, being pepper sprayed in the midst of this COVID pandemic, let alone any other time? Stay with us.
Rise up, neighbors, close all the camps and jails. No more, oh no, let my people go. Our children safe in loving arms. Let my people go. No hypocrisies, no rights or wrongs. Let my people go.
Let My People Go, sung by members of groups who are demanding New York Governor Andrew Cuomo and New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio release people from jail and immigration detention amidst this pandemic. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. This is the Quarantine Report. We end today's show looking at the mounting number of COVID-19 cases inside immigration jails across the country. One of the largest outbreaks is at the Otay Mesa Detention Center near San Diego, California, run by private prison company CoreCivic, which last week confirmed at least 27 cases of COVID among prisoners. Over the weekend, dozens there began a hunger strike to express growing fears about their safety. Last Friday, Otay Mesa prisoners were told to sign contracts written only in English in exchange for receiving face masks. Some refused to sign, prompting guards to pepper spray them. The waivers were reportedly later retracted. This is a woman in Otay Mesa describing the attack in her holding unit during a call with the immigration rights group Pueblos Sin Fronteras.
They are throwing pepper spray in all the cells. We are on hunger strike because they are coming to throw food at us like dogs. We have rights. We are not criminals. There's a woman who suffers from convulsions. They don't want to give her her medicine. All of our rights are being violated. It is not fair. Please help us. Get us out. All the cells have been pepper sprayed. There are many people who do not understand what is happening because they don't speak Spanish. They don't speak English. Help us. They are removing people from each cell in handcuffs. Please help us.
Activists say hundreds of people in prison California immigration jails are currently hunger striking. For more, we're joined in San Diego by Ruth Mendez, community activist volunteer with Otay Mesa Detention Resistance. Ruth, can you describe what's happening inside? These women were told they had to sign in order to get a face mask, a contract that said they would not hold CoreCivic, which runs this for-profit prison, responsible?
Yes, Amy, that is what happened. They were given forms and told, if they had to sign this form, which was only given in English. There are people inside this detention center that don't know Spanish or English at all. This form was only given in English, and people were just told, sign it quickly. If not, you don't get a mask, is what was basically said. It's inhumane. Some people from personal accounts that I've heard were even charged money for this mask form they had to sign too. And it's horrible. It's what's happening.
And Ruth, to reaffirm, most of the people in ICE detention they're basically they're not accused of any crimes. This is a civil detention pending adjudication of their status, isn't there? What's been the federal government's attitude toward releasing these detainees?
Currently, right now, there are plenty of people who are ready to go reunite with their families. They have their sponsors. They have everything that is needed. Some are even they are looking for parole, to be released on parole, on bond, or in any kind of opportunity to be able to reunite with their families. But right now, ICE has been not answering questions for people. There has been a block of just for legal, for people to contact their lawyers, all kinds of blockages right now that make it impossible so that people can have their rights of finishing or processing their asylum cases, right, in most of these times. And so that is, they're just being held in a death trap is what they're being held, and it is it's inhumane. We have so many accounts of people who every single day call into our organization telling us they just want to see their families. If it's the last time they will be able to see them, at least just one more time, because at the rate that this that the COVID is going right now inside the detention center. Just to give you a brief picture of what it looks like, just 3 days ago, the cases were already at 41 of confirmed cases inside. Just yesterday, I received a call with an update that it's now 49 cases inside. That was given to a detainee inside by the medic of ICE. And so, yeah, it's insane, and that has not made it out, and it's been 3 days, so it's insane what's happening.
I wanted to turn to Genesis Hernandez, a transgender woman being held at Otay Mesa, speaking to you, Ruth, last week about the abuse she's endured at this jail. In this audio clip, she's describing being retaliated against by Otay Mesa guards for making a phone call. She was recently put in solitary confinement.
And I thank you for being our voice out there, because in here, who's going to listen to us? The guards don't even wash their hands. They don't care about our lives. I put on a face mask today, but then I took it off because the guards are not covering their faces. They didn't even have gloves on when they had me in handcuffs.
Ruth Mendez, is Genesis still in solitary confinement? And, I mean, you even have the former ICE director, John Sandwig, is making very clear that ICE in particular has the sole authority to release all of these prisoners. He's demanding they do, as do many grassroots groups, and yet they haven't done this yet. But start with Genesis.
Yeah. So Genesis, she's still in solitary confinement right now. She does not have access to commissary. She does not have access. She has limited access to the phone. She is not able to even go to the library. We talked not too long ago, and it's just these little things that make her. Make it so much harder to be inside solitary right now, and it's insane. She right now is a very strong woman that I admire so much, and it's unfair what has been happening to her. Currently, right now, she was only because of that incident that she stood up for her, demanded answers from ICE and from just people around the staff of Court Civic. She was taken in handcuffs to solitary and given 15 days. However, that actually was doubled recently. So now it's going to be 30 days, and she was not given a reason why that is happening. But she has told us on multiple times, just speaking to us personally, that she does not think she will last 30 days inside solitary confinement because of how terrible the conditions are.
And could you talk about, in general, in Otay Mesa, are most of the detainees being held in dormitory-style huge rooms, or are they all in a few people to a cell?
Yeah, so it's the units, as to what I understand, it's difficult to get since the only way we can communicate and the only way that ICE and Court Civic are letting there to be communication right now is through phone calls. But what I imagine is it's pods, like units. So there can be from 100 people in one unit to 70 people. You know, the numbers vary between among units. But yeah, there are, it's social distancing and being able to, follow CDC guidelines. It's impossible to do so inside of these places. And there have been cases where people who have gone to medical units and come back positive have been sent to the same units again to be with other people. And yes, we know with this, with the pandemic, with COVID, it only takes a little bit for it to spread to everyone. So that isn't the conditions that they're in currently.
Ruth, we want to thank you for being with us. Also, this latest news, a federal judge in California has ordered ICE to urgently review the cases of prisoners most likely to suffer from the severe illness, these outbreaks of COVID, and he condemned the system-wide inaction in responding to the outbreak. Currently, about 31,000 people are in detention, in ICE detention. Ruth Mendez, volunteer with Otay Mesa Detention Resistance in San Diego, thanks so much for being with us. That does it for our show. Democracy Now! Is working with as few people on site as possible to protect against community spread. The majority of our remarkable team is working from home. I want to give a special thanks to our general manager, Julie Crosby. Democracy Now! Produced with Renee Feltz, Mike Burkty, Nagusder, Libby Rainey, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Tammy Warrenoff, Tarina Nadura, Sam Alcoff, Tamari Astudio, John Hamilton, Robbie Karen, Hani Massoud, Adriano Contreras, and Maria Terracena. Special thanks to Becca Staley, Dennis Moynihan, Miriam Barnard, Paul Powell, Mike DeFilippo, Miguel Noguera, Hugh Grant. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. This is the Quarantine Report.